would like to welcome you to our Securitybricks webinar, Accelerate CMMC 2.0, Automating Compliance with ServiceNow. Joining us today from Securitybricks, we have Raj Raghavan, CEO, and Ben Chung, partner. And from Microsoft, we have Carly Salmon, Compliance Technical Specialist. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all lines have been muted to reduce any kind of background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A pod on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer by the end of the presentation or follow up with you offline. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be emailed to you. Just to tell you a little bit about Carahsoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider supporting public sector organizations across federal, state, and local government agencies, including education and healthcare markets. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our presenters.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. This is Raj Raghavan. I'm with Securitybricks. I want to thank Ben Chung is with me, and he will do a little introduction of himself. And Carly, thanks for joining. Just last minute requests. I thought it'll be valuable for her to provide some insight from Microsoft perspective. Just a little teaser is that in the next few weeks, we'll have one exclusively with Microsoft, where we'll focus more about some of the work she and her team are doing, which is pretty exciting. I had a chance to listen in last week, so it's awesome. But I'll just let Ben and Carly introduce themselves, and then we can kind of run through a few items on CMMC and how we help with automation. Ben? You're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Chung. I'm a partner here at Securitybricks. I manage the risk and compliance team over here, as well as the lead over at ServiceNow. I've had over 24 years of experience in this space. So looking forward to sharing with you what we know and what we will learn and how we can, actually what we have today to help you assist with your CMMC certification journey. Carly, pass it over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, I'm Carly Salmon. As I said, I'm a compliance technical specialist here at Microsoft. I work in Microsoft Federal. So I work with our Department of Defense and some of our defense industrial-based customers on their data security journey. But prior to coming to Microsoft, I was a part of the DCMA DIBCAC. So I am very versed and continue to stay in the CMMC assessment space, just now on the Microsoft side. So thanks for having me, Raj.
Thank you, Carly. So as we have the way we have done this is we have a few points we want to make on CMMC itself, just some education on what it is. I know there's been an overload of conversations, but at least we thought we'll bring in some high-level points to set the stage. Then Carly will talk a little bit about external service providers and how important that is. It's something that's evolving. There's a lot of conversation about companies trying to play within the ecosystem, and these are who provide tools, technology, service that are part of the contractor base that are within the boundary and their roles and responsibilities. And then finally, Ben will show you some automation we do with ServiceNow. Next slide, Karina. So just a quick who we are. We are a accredited C3PAO. We are also a FedRAMP third-party assessor, so one of the few companies who have done both. It was a long and interesting journey, but we got it. We all live and work out of the 4 time zones in the US. We are all US citizens. Many of our team members are veterans with clearance, and we're very big on transitioning our service members from the field to cyber. So we've done a few, and we are continuing to have people within our ecosystem that are part of this. It's very exciting. As you can see, our focus is simple, which is cloud security and compliance. We have 2 partnerships, which one of them is ServiceNow. We're going to talk about it today. Another one is Microsoft, which over the next few weeks, as I said, we'll plan to do more automation with them, and we'll probably have another webinar that's focused on how we are helping customers within the Microsoft ecosystem comply to CMMC and other regulations. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the things that in the previous slide I was mentioning is we are a company that believes in automation, but not pure automation nor pure people, but it's kind of automation with a human touch. Many times you can't be compliant by just buying a tool, or it's not scalable to be compliant with having a army of consultants. So the idea here is, how do you blend both? How do you scale? And so the idea here is to automate what you can and have the humans validate where they are needed. So that's the approach. And we start off with some of the terms that I'm sure you've heard of. Why is CMMC? What is CMMC? What are we trying to protect? And it is more about the controlled and classified information. These are not new. We've talked to contractors who have for many, many years, and Carly will touch upon them, have been asked about protecting our defense information or information that's critical for our national security. There have been various ways. They've had self-assessments. They've asked them to assess and put scores, ability to show that they have basic cyber hygiene, protecting, incident reporting. But over the years, it has evolved. As you can see, there's been more conflicts, more complex threats. And how do you help a company that's manufacturing a particular widget that goes into a tank? How do you have them protect something in a cyber environment? There's a lot of education and complexity involved. And so things like the CMMC, the DFARS, help people at least baseline and say, okay, if you meet these, you have the basic controls to meet. So then came this 800-171 framework, which many of you in the space would know that NIST has several frameworks, and the CMMC or DoD decided to adopt the 800-171, while the GSA FedRAMP decided to adopt the 53. The interesting part is there's a lot of overlay, but essentially the way the intent of the control and some of that need to be met is a little different. Finally, there is this group called the C3PAO. There are about 53 or so of them today that are listed in the cyber AV side. These are CMMC third-party assessment organizations. They are companies that on behalf of the DoD, the DIPCAC, go in and assess the DoD contractors if they're a level 2 and above. And they are the people who validate. So this is a very interesting space, because the people who go through the C3PAO have to actually get themselves assessed through DIPCAC, and they have to get a perfect score, and then they're allowed to become a C3PAO. So these are some of the terms. You listen as we go in. Next one, Ben. So just an overview, like I just spoke earlier. Idea here is it's all about this is not compliance for the sake of compliance. This is really basic security, trying to make sure we have enough guardrails and enough rules to ensure that people are protecting the important information. So here, most of the ones that you can see that they've said, depending on who your organization, what type and what business you do, you'll need to be at a certain level of CMMC. You need to make sure you're certified at that level. This is an extension to DFARS, which has been around for a long time. That's what I mentioned, where people were doing self-assessments. They continue to do self-assessments. People who are contractors are really classified into 3 levels, and the target is all the DoD contractors and all the people within that ecosystem. So if I'm a contractor, I'm using a certain tool or a service or a managed service, all of them come into the boundary. So anybody who touches CUI, right, it has to be part of this CMMC compliance scope. So that's very critical. A lot of people say, I have only 4 people in this company touching 6 people. That's fine, as long as you can define that the people who are touching this CUI information are within the scope and have the adequate controls. That's that's what is important to pass a CMMC assessment. Next slide. Okay. It's very important. I'm sure you've seen this. There used to be CMMC 1.0 that had 5 levels, but now there are really 3 levels, which is you have people in the foundational, which is people who are, they call it level 1. These are people who handle FCI, and they are there are people who either contract, do some peripheral services and or subcontract with other primes. And for them, every year they just have to do a self-assessment. They go through it, they report their scores, they make sure they pass, and that's good. Level 2 is for people who are handling CUI. And really, this is where the crux of the work is, because they're about, and we'll go through how many contractors on this ecosystem. But this one is where you get a C3PO, a third-party assessor coming in and on behalf of the DoD or DIPCAT to ensure that you have met the intent of these controls. They review documentation, they review evidence, they interview people. This is your level 2. Level 3 is still being defined, and these are for the top tiers. And currently, the rules say that DIPCAT itself may run some of these assessments, but these are the people who are in the top, who do billions of dollars and in the very important vendors of the DoD. Next, okay. So this is where we are talking. Every day we go through this, and people ask us, how many people are going to be impacted? Who is impacted? There are about currently 220,000 plus DoD contractors who serve various branches of the military, and the numbers are about 80,000 are what they call level 2, and out of those, so if you take, so the rest of the 100 plus thousand are going to be level 1s. There are about maybe 5,000 level 3s. So you now know that there's about 5,000 or so level 3s. Those are the bigger ones. Then there's 80,000 who are in level 2s, and then the small other ones fall off in the level 1 category. Now, based on the information, based on what you do, the DoD or the prime can decide if you're a level 1 or a level 2. Now, in the new proposed rules that came out in December 23, they have said that some of the level 2 contractors can be eligible for self-assessment, but the rest have to go through a C3PO assessment. So you're talking about 76,000 plus around that contractors and their service providers who have to go through this assessment. So this is a pretty, it's a tall order to go through. There's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of confusion. So a lot of people, resources that understand what needs to happen. So this is kind of where, when we tell people that you may want to start thinking about CMMC, you may want to kind of talk to people about what it takes. We are really serious, because if that's, now some people have asked, when is it going to come? We don't know. There's currently, it's in the final rule making, and I'm sure Carly can add some insight into it. At some point, we feel this year, or maybe towards the end of the year, it will come into as a rule. But the question is, if you wait till then, you're going to have a lot of work. And we see that already with people who feel that they have done a lot of work on DFARS. They're still kind of figuring out, how are we going to tackle this CMMC assessment? Now, this has material impact. Now, this is not something that people say, you know what, I can get a waiver, or I can, these are going to show up in contracts. And I'll let Carly speak a little more, because she comes from that world. It's very important, because a lot of people, while they know it's going to come, there is importance. There's also some material things that people need to tell their management, because a lot of times people say, yeah, I've gone to my management, I've gone to my owners, I've explained to them. They're like, hey, when do we need to do it? It's an investment. It's not a cost, because this is going to have a return on investment. And so the question really is, you have to figure out what it takes and how does it, how are you going to move this forward? At least start to think and have these conversations and build an ecosystem of providers who can help you through this journey. Next slide. So these are the timelines. Perfect. We spoke about this. So whenever this comes, let's assume it is this November of 24 or December 24. The first 6 months, they're going to talk about doing self-assessments, some certification assessments, and then they're going to start just introducing the program. The next 1 year, which is between 7 to 12 months, you're going to have a lot more level 2 assessments we spoke about. So these are basically how the DoD decided to introduce or make sure that they can start, instead of putting all in one and it's black or white, they said, let's introduce the program in such a way that they gain adoption. There's also a lot of learnings. Now we learn every day. It is so exciting, because every day we speak, a customer or a partner brings a new problem statement, which we never talked about. There are not many people who have done this. A few people have gone through these assessments, and we'll talk through some of that. But essentially, these are things that are people, we're all learning. These are stuff that is just evolving. The intent of the controls, how do you actually implement technically? How do you report the implementation you have done actually meets a C3PO requirement? These are all new. So it's exciting because there's new problem statements, new technical implementations. So this also gives time for people to kind of say, okay, as this comes, what the final rule looks like, how is that going to translate to something we need to implement? So it's nice that they've given a 3-year window to kind of, make sure this program is adopted within the 300, 220, 300,000 plus services or contractors and their service providers within the ecosystem. This is something which is new. Well, it's not new, but it is something that's gaining a lot of prevalence. So in lieu of CMMC coming, whenever that day comes, there have been people asking about, hey, the DIPCAC came up and said, we can do something called a joint surveillance voluntary assessment, which is you as a contractor call voluntary, go through C3PO and say, I want to be assessed now on the current CMMC rules. If we can assess them, essentially we'll be able to go in and say that we are certified for the next 3 years, irrespective of when CMMC comes. Now, this helps in many ways because one, you are able to get ahead of the curve. Two, you are able to go with what the rules say today and not what may come. But the other flip side is that you got to get a perfect score of 110. There are no poems allowed. So we as assessors will assess you against 320 assessment objectives that lead up to the 110 controls. And you have to get, and DIPCAC, we work with the DIPCAC to do this. It's a joint assessment. So we kind of work with them. They oversee the assessment. They'll ensure that they, manage the activities, and they actually put the score in the EMAS. So this is something that a lot of companies are beginning to take a look, because one, they're saying that, let's get in the queue. If it so happens that we get our turn, we go get our GSVA. If we have to wait later, at least we have done it. So this exists today. If you or your company is interested in joining this queue, any of the C3POs can send information to CyberAB. They'll put you on the list, and this DIPCAC will, when they get to it, they'll call upon the contractor to say, hey, can we do this assessment with your C3PO? Next slide. So a little bit about NIST. If you hear about CMMC, based on NIST 800-171, there's 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives. So one thing to note is if we are a C3PO, come in and assess a organization, we have a set of 320 objectives, assessment objectives that we will validate. So your controls that you document, and we'll go through to make sure that those objectives are met. Each of those 110 controls have a set of assessment objectives. So our goal is, we've been asked to look at those objectives, but then the content or the intent will be for those controls. It's very important because we hear a lot of people about, hey, I've implemented this right, but have I documented in a way that an auditor understands? Have I implemented and documented in a way that the assessor understands? And finally, that's how they pass it. So it's very important that you take a look at these. A lot of people are familiar with 800-171. You've been doing DFORS, you've been doing other regulations. So this is not new. But what is new here is the fact that you got to make sure that you have demonstrated and documented the intent of the control so that you're able to show that you meet those CMMC requirements. This is the framework. This is divided. This is very interesting because when we look at our automation tool, in which Ben and others will talk through, we have created this automation both in ServiceNow and now working with Microsoft. We look at controls and see how much of this is technical, how much of this we can actually automate, so that some of this information, it comes to you from either the service provider, external service provider, the cloud service provider, or your own, what you're responsible. And then you kind of create these inherited, shared, and your own responsibility matrix for each of these controls, appropriate body of evidence, documentation. There's a whole So if you look at this framework and start to divide this, it's very interesting because you'll see that these families, within those families, we have ways we can make this, we can automate it and make it efficient. So, but just to give you this, this breaks down into how, what your objectives and your assessment controls look like. I'll stop here and I'm going to pass the podium to Carly, because this is, let her introduce herself, but let her talk a little bit about external service providers. She's at Microsoft. They are a service provider. If you have CMMC on GCC or GCC High, or if you're using Office 365. So I let her go through this because she's done you guys should look at her blog. She's done a great blog about body of evidence. It's kind of how I got got to meet with her, and she and her team they've done a lot of. One thing I like is as I'm going through more and more and talking to more people, even within Microsoft, I'm learning that there's a wealth of knowledge out there that you can actually listen. There are a lot of people have written blogs, information, things out there that you can take and then use it as a platform. They've invested. I've seen a CMMC accelerator that was put some time back. I've seen Zero Trust. It's very interesting that they have taken a number of an initiative to actually put out a number of these tools and documentation that can help people using this platform to actually jumpstart. So I'll stop here, Carly. It's yours, and then Ben will go through the automation. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So when it comes to external service providers, these are your cloud service providers, managed service providers, managed security service providers, and the list can kind of go on. So really, they're being pulled into the new proposed rule due to the potential of storing, processing, or having CUI. So a lot of it, if you are using an external service provider, it'll depend on what their scope of work with your company is. And from like a cloud service provider, and even with, in a sense, many different types of the managed service providers, especially if they have like a platform that you are using, it will also need to be FedRamped. And so, like Raj said, if they're not in the marketplace as FedRAMP approved and authorized, then they will need to meet equivalency, which will have a body of evidence. And I think, Raj, you might have a slide on that, so I'll save that for later. But it all depends on those, people, technologies, and what they have access to of your system and what they are involved in from like a facilities perspective, if you're using like a shared data center. And these things come into scope based upon how you are using those services. And so really, if you are looking at your cloud service provider, are they FedRAMP moderate at a minimum? Are they in that marketplace? And there's a marketplace that anybody can go to. That's really one of the first things that an assessor is going to look for if they're potentially not familiar with that product or like that platform or that cloud service provider. They're going to go to the FedRAMP marketplace. And then if they're not there or they're in process of being authorized, then they're going to ask you for that body of evidence. And so most managed service providers are also working on a cloud platform, and they're typically going to, if they're in the business of working with defense contractors or wanting to be in the business of being with federal, then they're probably using a cloud service provider that will be FedRAMPed, because most who do this are thinking about, will CMMC affect me? Or they want to be assessed so that they can provide that assurance to their customers. There are a bunch of providers that I've spoken with over the past few years that this is on their list of wants, but because they don't have contracts with the government, DIVCAC and DCMA is not going to go assess them. So with this rulemaking, which we still don't know if that's going to pull them into this requirement, because if it does pull them in as it's written in the proposed rule, your managed service provider will have to have that certification before you can get that contract. So that is something to think about if you are using a managed service provider. I mean, a lot of that, as like the third bullet says, is that responsibility matrix. And that's why a lot of companies, especially as you get smaller, will use managed service providers because that responsibility is then shared. And then you're inheriting the security controls of that security provider or that cloud service provider. Like at Microsoft, depending on how much of the platform you use, the responsibility falls more and more onto the Microsoft technologies, and you inherit the controls and how we implement security based upon how you're using our products. But there's never 0% customer responsibility, because there's always going to have to be checks. There's always going to be policies, and those are all things that are going to be internal. And if you haven't started down this road or this journey to becoming CMMC compliant, because there are many, the NIST 800-171 and the DFARS clause requirement has been out since 2017, but that it even started kind of before that. It was just codified into a contract clause in 2017, but even then there weren't really checks. And so that's where DIBCAC was birthed from, in that trust but verify, trust but validate kind of mantra. And so that is what DCMA is looking at. And as Raj was talking about the JSVs, this has been a way for a company to go through NC3POs to be starting assessing companies, where DCMA kind of rides side by side, and they assess the NIST 800-171, while the C3PO will assess CMMC 2.0. And so you get kind of both of those scores. Now, the certification is not something that you get today, because the rule has not been implemented, but it's something that you can use. And if you are waiting for the rule, you're going to be late, because this could potentially affect your contracts, and as the timeline goes out, and as there are more and more C3PAOs, they are filling up their schedules now that there's the proposed rule, and it's only going to increase as the rule is kind of blessed and sent out. So really, there are questions of, well, what if it changes? It's hard to want to put forth the amount of money that it might be into this investment, but from a requirement standpoint, from this rule proposal to comments and then publishing, there probably won't be much change to the requirements. So you have something to get started. And Raj mentioned before, cybersecurity, IT, it's an investment. But really, because of how our work is going more and more technology focused, it's really turning into a line of business, even for companies that only use technology to do their business or to store their information. Even if you're making nuts and bolts and helicopters, like, IT is still going to be something that is, and security is something that will be important to you. But if you don't have that knowledge of what to know, what's right, like, there's a lot of companies out there, there's a lot of products out there, you don't know where to start. So you don't want to invest money in something today when you're going to have to change it in a week. That's where some of these consultants come into play, and things like this webinar are kind of a good place to start. But the CMMC AB's marketplace is a great place to start. They're all companies that are on there that can have these consultations, that can help you prepare, as well as potentially your MSP has that capability. It's just knowing to go to the right place, because there's also a lot of people, companies out there that maybe aren't approved within the construct of how the accreditation body has been built out for supporting OSCs and contractors on their journey to CMMC 2.0. So that's really all I have kind of on this slide. I don't know. So the body of evidence. So we talked about FedRAMP and FedRAMP equivalency. So a FedRAMP equivalency memo came out, which requires assessors to review if there's a company that is not FedRAMP authorized yet, as long as they are FedRAMP equivalent, that won't negatively affect a company going through an assessment. But so in order to prove that equivalency, you have to provide a body of evidence. Now, there's semantics. In my personal Carly non-Microsoft opinion, as far as what it looks like, from reading the memo to how it's being interpreted, implemented, what the intent behind it is to be. But with this body of evidence, like they are asking every contractor to provide that body of evidence, even if they've seen it, read it before. Part of that is the assurance that you did your due diligence by the memo, by reviewing the body of evidence and validating that CSP, ESP is truly equivalent. And like Raj said, we have a blog that talks about how you can get that body of evidence if you are a Microsoft GCC High customer, because that is currently in review. But I've heard we are going to be seeing a change in that equivalency memo. So we'll see what that looks like when they make those updates based on now putting it into practice. So you will need this for any CSP or potential platform that you are using that is not FedRAMP authorized. So it's putting the onus on, and it's ensuring, validating that you, the defense contractor, are doing your due diligence, because that's really a lot of where this came from. You know, it was before DIBCAC was established, it was really based upon, you know, contractors saying, yeah, we're doing this, we're compliant with it. They didn't really have skilled people in the contracting office to truly validate during their contract clause validation assessments if these security plans and if the implementation was truly meeting the requirements. And so this is just that level from a FedRAMP equivalency standpoint. Next slide.
I think, Carly, this is Ben's cue to thank you, Carly. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Appreciate it. Pain points. All right. So this is what we're here for, right? There is definitely a lot of pain points, but I think here are a few that we want today. The CMMC journey begins with a clear identification of your organizational boundaries and a comprehensive list of assets within scope. This typically includes systems, applications, third-party vendors, and processes that interact with COI data. Now, however, organizations, especially large ones, often have a fairly complex structures with multiple departments. They have cloud environment, they have on-prem environment, many different subsidiaries and external partners. Defining which party organizations falls within the CMMC boundaries can be and has been really rather challenging for large organizations today. Now, another component to boundary challenge is identifying all the systems that process, stores, and transmit control unclassified information, COI, and federal contract information as well. The organizations that have legacy systems and various platforms that are interconnected, ensuring that all that relevant systems are within the boundaries and compliance with CMMC requirements is definitely a very daunting task in itself. Now, Carly spoke a little bit about the responsibility matrix, and I'll cover a little bit more here. You know, first, we have a very complex service model today, right? Cloud service provider comes in various size and models, right? There's IaaS, there's PaaS, there's SaaS, and each with a very different responsibility split between the providers and the customers. As Carly mentioned earlier, there's never at any point where there's a zero responsibility for the customers. Now you got to map these responsibility accurately to CMMC controls. Again, it's a very complex effort. Then there is the shared responsibility model, where the CSP provides and operates under shared responsibility models, where the provider handles some security aspect of it, such as the physical infrastructure, and then the customer handles the other part of it, which really focuses around logical security controls like data security, access management, right? And as well as policies, procedures, things of that sort. Now, clearly delineating these responsibilities is critical and again challenging. So I've seen again far too often boundaries are not correctly defined, and a list of assets that should have been included are completely left out. So I'm sure for those who are who's been an auditor in the past can probably attest to it, that whenever they first do something, whether it's for PCI, for NIST, for FedRAMP, for HIPAA, the first time you're going through it, you're going to have a very tough time defining your boundaries and getting those set correctly. Now, assuming that your boundaries and assets are defined and everything is accurate, now each control evidence must be carefully scrutinized and with detailed explanations within the SSP how the intent of the requirements was met, and whether the controls is inherited from your CSP provider. Completing the SSP itself, and then pain point there is that it's a pretty hefty document. It usually, it comes to about 300 to 400 pages, pulling information in from various areas of the organizations. Another challenge to the SSP is that evidence must be collected within 30 days of the assessment. So if you start your effort on this, and by the time you start your assessment, some of the evidence you have collected, or in fact, maybe most of the evidence you have collected are over 30 days old, well, guess what? You got to go back and recollect all of those. Then there is the challenge of the poem. As far as we know, obtaining a poem waiver today is limited, and so it's not something that you could just easily, just give me one, right? Now, assuming that you did your assessments, issues were identified, and some were resolved quickly, easily, because there was a documentation that you just got to update. But in some cases, due to technical limitations, you might end up with a poem. Given what we know today, we highly recommend that you target to achieve high-level compliance to minimize the reliance on POEM. Now, the next thing is most of our clients today conduct their security risk compliance assessment manually. They're setting up interviews with the SME and collecting evidence manually in a compliance folder. This manual approach is really labor-intensive and really prone to inaccuracy and completeness as well. The last is the manual process. The manual process is that evidence collections is often results in a lack of clarity on what type of artifacts supporting evidence are required and are consumable by C3 PAO. So with that said, let me do a quick time check. We're at 8:40. I'm going to do a demo a few slides after this, so I'm going to go through the next few slides maybe a little faster. So our journey with ServiceNow, we started with ServiceNow back in 2020. We are a ServiceNow platform and specialist partner. Our expertise is in the field of, our expertise. Well, we were brought into ServiceNow because of our expertise being an assessor and an auditor. We developed a really good and clear understanding of the type of data, artifacts, and supporting evidence are required to meet various control objectives. So we started back in 2020. We started developing automated indicators for CIS 7, ISO 27001, and then later we updated CIS 7 to CIS 8.0, as well as starting to measure cloud security postures for AWS, Azure that were based on the CIS benchmark. Let's see what else I want to cover here. Well, again, the very interesting effort when we started this with ServiceNow back then was a very painful process for us, because we understand what the artifacts is, but what we had to do was to, once we understand what the data are required, we literally had to dig through every modules, every offer within ServiceNow, whether it was from ITOM, ITAM, IRM, VRM, CMDB, Discovery, DevOps, SecOps, you name it. We dug through every tables, every data field that's available to pull the data that are needed to address various controls requirements. Go ahead and move on to the next slide, please, Karina. So our approach to automations is really simple. Simplicity is our model to CMMC automations. Given our experience and expectations of artifacts that are required by C3PAL. Because again, we are a C3PAL organization ourselves. So we know exactly what we expect and what we want to see when we evaluate organizations' controls objective to determine if they are passing it or they're failing it. So we leverage out-of-the-box functionality to automate collections of these artifacts and supporting evidence using data that you already have in your ServiceNow environment to help reduce the number of controls that can be that needs to be manually validated. So an example of how we do this is develop a lot of basic and scripted indicators to continuously monitor your compliance posture against a list of technical CMMC controls. Let's go ahead and jump on to the next slide. So, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my video is not on. Let me try to move this screen here. All right, so the CMMC accelerators. So we thought after we built all this accelerator for ServiceNow, say, you know, why don't we do something for the CMMC community? Why don't we build something that could help them jumpstart their journey, right? So we went ahead and built 2 accelerators, and they're available in the ServiceNow app stores. And I'll show you where to find and when to get and download them. So it is, first one is the CMMC accelerator for self-assessment. And then the second one that we built was for the vendors, for contractors and subcontractors. So for the self-assessments, it is built on the CAMs, which I'll talk a little bit about later as well. It does provide you with all of the content for NIST 800-171. It resides in the compliance and policy and compliance modules, where it contains the objective, the authority documentations under there. And it also provides a list of questionnaires that you can immediately leverage to conduct your self-assessment. Then we have the vendor compliance accelerator. That one uses the VRM modules. You can download it and immediately fires it off to conduct a vendor risk assessment, or I'm sorry, not a vendor risk assessment, but a vendor assessments against your subcontractors to determine how are they, how's their posture against the NIST 800-171 framework. Go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. I'm going to speed up my presentation here a little bit so that we can get through a quick demo as well as a Q&A sessions to address some of the questions that you guys have here. The benefits of the CMMC accelerators, again, is built on the policy and compliance modules. It integrates nicely in there, and I'll show you exactly how that kind of works. What it does is it provides all the content that you need to get you kickstart your self-assessment, as well as it has automated workflows and dashboards, as well as the the supplier performance risk systems scoring as well. So based on how many controls you have passed, how many you have failed, it kind of gives you a scoring of where do you exactly stands within the scoring of 110 points. And at the end of the day, it also helps provide you with the system security plan that you're going to need to put together. That I mentioned earlier, that's 400 pages. Again, vendor accelerator, I'll talk more about the benefits of it during the demo. But again, it utilizes the VRM modules. It provides you a nice dashboards and reporting capability. Again, the benefit is the questionnaires are already built for you, and you can modify them if you need to, and it provides tracking and remediations. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, ServiceNow CAM. So this is, for those of you who aren't familiar with CAM or have used it, it came out a while ago. I think it was back in the Cravat release. It's built on the concept of the NIST RMF, the Risk Management Framework. It has 7 steps. First is prepare, categorize, implement, assess, and monitor. So prepare. Let me see. I'll see if I could jump through this really quick. I'll just go at it at a very high level. If you need to, we're happy to set up another meeting with you guys and just walk you guys through this in more detail. Prepare is really straightforward. You identify your system boundaries. I talked about it earlier. A lot of people are having trouble with it. Then you go to the categorize mode. Categorize phase is really in the traditional phase of conducting an assessment or risk assessment is sort of a classifications where you determine your business impact, right? Whether financial impact, you do your BA on it. You kind of evaluate whether you're high, medium, low risk. Then you select to the next phase, and you move on to the next phase where you select the list of controls that you want to test and verify. Then you move on to the fourth phase, where you implement these controls. And once you implement it, then you go to the assess phase and verify, hey, do I have this control implemented as designed? And once you have all that assessed, then you authorize and you can streamline your workflows, and then you can provide an SSP as well as generations for your ATO authorized to operate through this authorized process. Then you move on to the very last phase, which is to provide a continuous monitoring of your controls around CMMC. Let's go and jump on to the next slide, please. All right, demo. Do you guys want to go ahead and Brooke or Raj or Carly take quick questions while I go and fire up the demo instance here with ServiceNow?
If anyone has any questions, the Q&A pod is on the bottom of your screen. How do I know if I will need self-assessment or C3PAO assessment if going for level 2?
Carly?
I believe that's something that's going to would have to be outlined in your contract as far as like what, because that'll be determined really by like what type of CUI. They haven't quite really explained how to determine who's a self-assessment versus the C3PAO assessment, but I would venture to guess that that would be something that will get answered when the proposed rule is published, as well as something that would have to be identified in the contract as well. Because that will probably also depend on like the program, where you fit in that program, supply chain wise. There are a few factors that I could think that would determine self-assessment versus C3PAO assessment. That's something I think that would be contract by contract.
Yeah, and just to add it, it's also based on the risk exactly. So how much risk you possess. Now, this can be determined both by the DoD agency and or your prime. Your prime contractor can say that due to the sensitivity and the amount of information, the type of information you handle for us, you need to be a level 2 C3PAO audit. So again, when we told you there's a very small, it's like less than 5% or whatever right now, self-assessments. We don't even know if that's going to even exist or all of them become C3PAOs, but the guideline is that, plan for a C3PAO, hope for self-assessment.
How much automation is possible if I only have IRM module?
Now, if you have, it depends on where the data is coming from within ServiceNow. So if you have the IRM module, say IRM Pro or IRM Pro to start with, the CAM, which Ben is going to show you, will work. The automation will depend on how much data is within your CMDB. We have customers, we have done custom integration, especially things like Azure, where they don't have SecOps. They'd like to still bring the Azure data in for remediation, for POAM. So the richer the CMDB, the more automation. And you can have it through out-of-the-box integrations that ServiceNow modules provide, or you can do a custom integration.
All right, I'm ready to give a quick demo. We've got 10 minutes left. Do a quick one here. I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay, it's not letting me share.
Oh no.
Brooke, am I permitted to share my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I am.
Oh,
Right.
there you go.
Can you see now? Okay, perfect.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so our apps, the two that I talked about earlier, are available in the ServiceNow App Store. So if you just go to the store, servicenow.com, and you type in CMMC, you will see the two apps that are available to you from Securitybricks. One is to conduct a self-assessment. So you hover over it, it will tell you that user application itself. And then the other one utilizes the vendor VRM modules. This is the one where you conduct an assessment of your subcontractors. Now, you can go ahead and click on it, install it on your own, and play with it. These are all free. And I will show you once you install it, how that looks like in your ServiceNow instance. Okay, so now after you install it, what it does is it will provide you the authority documentations, and they reside in the policies and compliance over here, you can see. And what you can do is search on a common name for CMMC, and it will pop up as a CMMC security baseline. Let's see, once you open that up, it will provide you the control objective of 110. And that's what you will use to conduct your evaluations, assessments, and attestations of your vendors and of yourself against where you stand in your CMMC certification process. Again, as Carly mentioned earlier, the requirements are still changing, but it gives you a really quick head start in terms of what you need to do. Now, to do a self-assessment, I'm just going to go through it real quick here. We've got 7 minutes under the constraint here. What I'll do is I'm going to show you the CAM modules, and then if you have time, we'll go through the vendor as well. But if you don't have time, go ahead and reach out to us. We're happy to, walk you through, more in details of what it does, what it can do for you out of the box, as well as, what are some of the additional capabilities for a paid part of it, where you can, leverage the data that you have in other parts of the environment that are not in ServiceNow today, and help you automate, increase your level of automations much further from what you see from the free. Okay, all right. So I just click on the authorizations, and I'm going to go through and select all authorization boundaries. And from here, I already set up a quick CMMC 2.0 demo here. And it's already in the implement state. Earlier, I talked about prepare, categorize, select, implement. But the intent of this demo here is not to show you how the CAM works, but show you how our accelerator leverages the CAM modules and CAM application itself. Prepare, we talked about, you identify your boundaries, you categorize it, whether it's high, medium, low risk, then you select the number of controls or what controls you want. So what I wanted to show you here is, in this case here, we have a baseline of 10 controls versus 110, and that are broken down into 320 control objective. The idea where I only selected 10 here is to show you that, hey, you know what, maybe you just downloaded this and you already have a number of controls that you have already tested in the past, so you already got that emotions. I don't want to test 110. I just want to, try out, 10, or some of these other ones that are being managed by another department that I can leverage. I don't need to do all of it. So it's a sort of an a la carte. All the content is there for you. You select what you want, what you don't want, and then you move on and you conduct your evaluations against the number of controls that you want to validate. In this case here, I selected 10 because it was just a lot faster for me to show you. And now I have gone and selected the number of controls I want to test. And I'm going to move into implement state, assuming that in this case here, I have gone and implemented already. And now I'm going to move on to the assess states. And the assess states, then I can, there will be a list of questionnaires that are then sent out to the controls owner and asking them, hey, do you have these controls in place? Do you not have this? And if you don't have it, what is your time to implement, so that could be, all that information can be included in part of the poem. I am talking really fast because we got a few minutes left, but I do want to show you quickly just the results, right? So assuming that I've, gone through it, the owner, Ahmed, has already completed his responses, and I see that, a number of these are compliant, and I see that there are 3 of them that are not compliant. Now it gives me a picture, okay, all right, these are things that I'm going to need to take a look at, where I'm able to probably generate, I'm sorry, clicking the wrong button there. Hopefully it doesn't jump there. Okay, it jumps the right controls here. And I can see that, let's see, I can see that there is a issue probably created right here, right? There's an issue created. So from here, I can identify, from the issues, evaluate it, and determine if it's a quick fix, it's a policies, or if it's a technical limitation is where I'm going to end up having to spend a lot of money on remediating it, or ended up creating a poem, to address it at a later time. All right, so with that said, we then move on to, I can go back there to two other phases where you then authorize it, or you can create an SSP, and then you move on to the monitor state. Now, we have 7 minutes left. I do want to give some time to answer questions that you guys have. I think that's more relevant. But again, the intent here is to kind of show you how it, quickly and easily integrates with what's available within ServiceNow. And, reach out to us. We'll give you a more in-depth demo and show you additional capabilities that we have that are really gonna enhance and streamline your CMMC certification process. So with that said, Raj, I'm going to pass it back to you, and let's go address the questions.
I've never heard Ben speak so fast. Ben speaks fast, but this is real fast. So again, appreciate everyone's time. Thank you. I just wanted to close by if you have any questions. If not, we're happy to jump in. We have more webinars coming. We have more automation coming specifically on Microsoft. Excited about more things to do. Essentially collaborate with both our customers and partners. This doesn't come without our ecosystem and support of the people around us. So we hope you'll challenge us more. You'll give us new problem statements, and we all as a community can help go through this, together. So, Brooke, any other questions? And I do want to thank Brooke and Carahsoft. They've been fabulous. We do business with them. They're a very, very good partner for us, and thanks for arranging this. Brooke, any other questions or anything in the last 2 minutes?
Thank you. We probably have time for a couple more.
Yeah.
If I am a subcontractor for a prime, who will decide my level?
The prime, sorry.
What are the requirements for my managed service providers?
Carly.
So your managed service providers, if they fall into your scope of the assessment, and that's really going to be the big key, they will have to follow the same. So if you are to be CMMC level 2, your managed service provider will also have to be CMMC level 2.
How does CMMC align with other cybersecurity frameworks?
Well, so CMMC is derived from the NIST 853. So there is a direct mapping to that. I don't know if it's in like the back of version 2 of the 800-171 version 2, because a lot of the CMMC requirements are based off of the NIST 800-171, which maps back to the NIST 853. But within the 800-171 in the description, it references where you can get more information from other different NIST framework guidances. And, whether you wanted to know this or not, like one of the reasons why they're not just using something like the NIST 853 is because for government contractors, the requirements need to be written in a way where they tell you what do you need to do, not how to do it. Whereas the 853 kind of goes a little bit more into the how. So you have kind of free reign to how you meet that requirement. You just have to meet that requirement.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all of our participants as well as our speakers, Raj, Ben, and Carly, for being with us today. We hope the information you received has been helpful, and if you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.